Paris, 1898. Marie Curie stood over a glowing vial of radium, marveling at its bluish-green light. She had just discovered two new elements, polonium and radium, achievements that would make her the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only person to ever win two in different sciences. But what Marie didn't know was that every second she spent holding those samples was slowly killing her. She stored radioactive vials in her desk drawer. She carried them in her pockets as if they were lucky charms. She stirred glowing solutions in open containers with no gloves, no protective gear, and no idea of the danger. Her laboratory, her books, even her clothes, all of them became radioactive. To this day, more than a century later, her notebooks are still too contaminated to touch. They're kept locked away in lead-lined boxes. For decades, Marie's body absorbed deadly radiation. Her hands were burned, her health declined, and she developed aplastic anemia, a rare blood condition that destroyed her bone marrow. In 1934, she died, at just 66 years old. Her brilliance changed science forever, but her death was entirely preventable. If radiation safety protocols had existed then, she might have lived long enough to see her discoveries save millions of lives. Cuba, 1900. Yellow fever was one of the deadliest diseases of the time, killing thousands across the Americas. Doctors didn't know how it spread. Some thought it came from direct contact. Others believed it floated in the air. Jesse Lazier, a U.S. Army physician, had another theory: mosquitoes. But to prove it, he took a reckless gamble. Instead of using animals or volunteers, Lazier deliberately allowed an infected mosquito to bite him. Days later, the fevers began. His skin turned yellow. His body weakened rapidly. He was dying of the very disease he was trying to defeat. On September 25, 1900, Jesse Lazier died at just 34 years old. Ironically, his death confirmed his theory. It proved mosquitoes were the carriers of yellow fever, but the sacrifice was unnecessary. Safer experiments could have revealed the same truth without costing him his life.
Moscow, 1928. Alexander Bogdanov was not just a scientist, he was a dreamer. He believed he had found the key to immortality: blood transfusions. Bogdanov theorized that by exchanging old blood with young blood, the body could be rejuvenated. He was so convinced, he began experimenting on himself. Dozens of times, he transfused blood from young volunteers into his own veins, and, at first, it seemed to work. He claimed his eyesight was improving, that his hair was thicker, his strength greater. But Bogdanov ignored the basics of medicine. Blood types had been discovered only 2 decades earlier, and diseases were poorly screened. Then came his final experiment. He transfused blood from a student who unknowingly carried both malaria and tuberculosis. Within hours, Bogdanov fell violently ill. His condition worsened each day. Fevers, weakness, organ failure. No treatment could save him. He died at the age of 54. What he thought would make him live forever killed him instead. The tragedy? It was avoidable. A simple blood test, a check for infection, things we consider standard today, would have saved his life.
Germany, 1896. Otto Lilienthal was known as the Glider King. He was the first man to truly master controlled flight, decades before the Wright brothers. His daring glides captured the imagination of the world, proving that human flight was possible. But his obsession with testing new designs came with danger. Lilienthal often launched his gliders from tall hills, soaring hundreds of feet through the air with little more than wood and canvas supporting him. And there was no backup system, no parachute, no safety measures. On August 9th, 1896, while demonstrating a new glider, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind tilted the craft sharply. Lilienthal lost control. He plummeted more than 50 feet to the ground. His spine shattered on impact. He died the very next day. His last words were chilling: "Sacrifices must be made." Lilienthal's death was avoidable. He could have tested smaller models, used safety harnesses, or waited for calmer winds. Instead, the man who pioneered human flight paid the ultimate price for flying too soon. Canada, early 1900s. In a quiet physics lab filled with strange glass tubes and faint chemical smells, a young woman was making history. Her name was Harriet Brooks, one of the brightest minds of her time and one of the very few women working at the cutting edge of science. She worked alongside Ernest Rutherford, the father of nuclear physics. Together, they were unraveling one of the biggest mysteries of the age: how atoms decayed. Harriet's experiments with radon gas and radioactive elements helped prove that atoms weren't unchanging, eternal particles, but things that could break apart, releasing enormous amounts of energy. Her discoveries laid the foundation for the entire field of nuclear physics. But there was a hidden danger. Harriet often worked in poorly ventilated labs, surrounded by radioactive gases. She had no gloves, no protective clothing, no masks. When she opened flasks of radon, she inhaled the fumes directly. Colleagues often saw her coughing, pale and weak, but she pushed on, driven by her passion for discovery. Over the years, the invisible toll built up inside her body. By her 40s, her health was failing. Her immune system collapsed, her body weakened, and the diagnosis came: leukemia. In 1933, Harriet Brooks died at just 56 years old. Her death was slow, painful, and tragically avoidable. Today, we know that even brief exposure to radioactive gases requires strict safety measures. A ventilated lab, protective gear, even simple masks could have saved her life. Her brilliance shaped nuclear science, but she never lived to see how her work would change the world. Rwanda, 1980s. High in the mist-covered mountains, Dian Fossey trekked through the dense jungle, notebook in hand. Her mission? To save the last mountain gorillas from extinction. Fossey was fearless. She lived among the gorillas, studied their behavior, and showed the world they weren't violent beasts. They were gentle, social, intelligent creatures. Her groundbreaking work inspired global conservation efforts and brought hope to a dying species. But Dian wasn't just fighting extinction. She was fighting people. The forests were crawling with poachers, hunters who killed gorillas for trophies, meat, and even baby gorillas to sell on the black market. Fossey declared war on them. She confiscated snares, burned traps, destroyed their camps. She openly confronted poachers, sometimes face to face, making enemies in the process. Her camp staff warned her that she was going too far, but Dian believed she had to stand between the gorillas and those who wanted them dead. Then came the morning of December 27th, 1985. The door to her cabin was forced open. Inside, her staff found her brutally murdered. She had been attacked with a machete and left on the floor. The murder shocked the world. Though the case remains unsolved, most believe it was retaliation from poachers she had crossed. Her death was devastating, but also preventable. Dian Fossey lived in a remote mountain cabin with no security, no protection, and no allies nearby. Her bravery saved the gorillas, but it also left her exposed. Today, the mountain gorilla population survives largely because of her work. But the woman who saved them never lived to see the success of her fight. Ohio, 1944. Thomas Midgley Jr. was an inventor whose ideas reshaped the modern world. He created leaded gasoline. He popularized CFCs, the chemicals used in refrigerators and spray cans. At the time, these inventions seemed miraculous. Today, we know they poisoned the planet. But Midgley's personal tragedy was almost poetic. In his later years, he contracted polio, leaving him disabled. True to form, he invented a mechanical system of pulleys and ropes to lift him in and out of bed. One morning, the machine malfunctioned. The ropes tangled around his body and strangled him to death. The man who choked the atmosphere with lead and chemicals was literally choked by his own invention. It was an accident, avoidable, but almost symbolic of how his brilliance and recklessness had always gone hand in hand. Washington, 1980. Volcanologist David Johnston knew Mount St. Helens was dangerous. He camped just 6 miles from its peak, armed with instruments, waiting for signs. On the morning of May 18th, the mountain exploded. The blast was hundreds of times stronger than an atomic bomb. Johnston grabbed his radio. "Vancouver! Vancouver! This is it!" Those were his last words. Seconds later, a wall of ash and fire consumed everything. His body was never found. Yet his warning saved lives. His call gave officials the seconds they needed to evacuate and protect thousands. Johnston's death was avoidable. Better shelters, more distance, stronger safety zones could have saved him. But in the chaos of science versus nature, he became both victim and hero. London, 1626. It was bitterly cold, snow piling on the ground. Francis Bacon, philosopher, scientist, and statesman, was riding in his carriage when a curious thought struck him. Could freezing preserve meat? Most men of his stature would have just written the idea in a notebook, but not Bacon. He stopped the carriage, bought a chicken, and insisted on testing his idea immediately. Right there in the snow, he stuffed the chicken's carcass full of ice with his bare hands. The cold seeped into his fingers, his clothes, his lungs. He finished the experiment, but he never recovered from the exposure. Pneumonia set in, and within weeks, the brilliant mind who helped shape the scientific method was dead. And here's the tragic twist. His experiment worked. Freezing does preserve food, but it didn't have to cost him his life. Had he waited for proper tools, or simply not risked his health in a snowstorm, his genius might have continued changing the world. Los Alamos, 1945. Late at night, alone in the lab, 24-year-old Harry Daghlian was running critical mass experiments with the same demon core. He stacked tungsten carbide bricks around it, brick by careful brick, measuring neutron reflection. The room hummed with quiet tension. Each brick brought the core closer to the brink. Then his hand slipped. A single brick clattered onto the core. A pulse of blue light filled the room. Panic. Daglian clawed at the bricks, trying to undo the mistake, but the radiation had already torn through him. Hours later, his hand turned black with burns. His body began shutting down. He lingered in agony for 25 days before radiation poisoning claimed him. The cruel irony? He was the first human ever to die from a plutonium accident, and he had been working alone, without barriers, without backup. One brick, one mistake, one life wasted. United States, 1970s. Claudia Kolb was young, ambitious, and fascinated by primates. She believed that working with chimpanzees up close was the key to understanding them. But safety protocols were weak. No reinforced barriers, no tranquilizers, just a thin line between human and animal. One day that line snapped. A chimp she was studying turned violent. Claudia fought, but against a 150-pound animal with raw muscle and primal strength, she stood no chance. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Her death was a brutal reminder. Science isn't just dangerous in test tubes. Nature itself demands respect. Strong cages, safety measures, simple precautions could have saved her life. Los Alamos, 1946. In a dimly lit laboratory, 8 scientists crowded around a table. At the center sat the demon core, a lump of plutonium so volatile it could unleash a chain reaction in a heartbeat. Louis Slotin, the lab's golden boy, was about to perform a dangerous demonstration. The move was nicknamed tickling the dragon's tail. Why? Because one slip meant death. Slotin smirked, calm and confident. Instead of the mechanical rig designed to keep the core stable, he used his bare hands. His only barrier between life and catastrophe? A thin screwdriver holding the plutonium halves apart. The room was silent. Then, slip. The screwdriver wobbled. The spheres kissed. A blinding blue flash filled the room. Slotin's hand shot forward, ripping the pieces apart, shielding everyone else from the worst of it. He was a hero, but the dragon had bitten. In that single second, Slotin absorbed a lethal dose of radiation. Over the next 9 days, his body disintegrated from the inside out. His organs shut down. His skin burned and blistered. He knew exactly what was happening, and that he couldn't stop it. Louis Slotin saved his team. But his death? Completely avoidable. All because of a screwdriver. Malaysia, 2009. Michael Dacre had a dream, a revolutionary new aircraft called the jet pod. Low-flying, cheap, lightning fast. It could change air travel forever. On a sweltering day in Malaysia, he climbed into the cockpit for the jet pod's big test. The engines roared, the craft shot into the sky. But seconds later, it stalled. The jet pod plunged, it slammed into the ground and erupted in flames. Dacre was killed instantly. The investigation was brutal. Corners had been cut. Tests skipped. The jet pod wasn't ready. In aviation, there are no shortcuts. And Dacre's dream ended in the fireball of his own ambition. Dartmouth College, 1996. Karen Wetterhahn was no ordinary scientist. She was a world expert in toxic metals. She knew the risks better than anyone. But that day, in her lab, a few silvery drops of dimethylmercury fell onto her latex glove. She didn't panic. She'd worn protection. She thought she was safe. She wasn't. The mercury seeped through the glove, through her skin, and into her bloodstream. Months passed before the symptoms began. Slurred speech, stumbling steps, trembling hands. The diagnosis was brutal. Mercury poisoning, irreversible. By the time doctors knew what it was, the damage was done. Karen slipped into a coma and never woke up. She was just 48. Her death shocked the scientific world. Today, labs use multi-layer gloves and airtight hoods because of her tragedy. But for Karen Wetterhahn, the warning came too late. Soviet Union, 1987. Deep inside a secret lab, chemist Andrei Zheleznyakov worked with the Novichok, one of the deadliest nerve agents ever designed. A weapon so toxic that a single drop could end a life. One day something went wrong. A leak. Silent. Invisible. He breathed it in before he even knew it was there. Seizures racked his body. His muscles convulsed. Doctors fought to keep him alive, and they succeeded at first. But the poison never left him. For years he suffered. Memory loss, chronic pain, nerve damage that made even the smallest tasks torture. His body withered. By 1992, Andrei was gone, destroyed by the very weapon he had helped bring into existence. His death was cruel, ironic, and entirely avoidable. He was a victim of the monster his lab had unleashed.